everyone. My name is Linda Golik. I am the Health and Wellbeing Consultant for Bellin Health, and I am so happy that you were able to join us today. We started these mental health moments because we knew that with everything going on with COVID-19, that people were just really searching out some additional resources, and you really told us that you wanted additional resources and tools to help yourselves and your employees, your friends, and your families manage everything that's going on at this time. So Charles LaTorre, who is a Bellin Health behavior therapist, was gracious enough to start doing these with us. And because he has been so popular, he is backed by popular demand. And Charles has actually agreed to do monthly segments with us. And we are always going to tie that to our Lifesaver Wellbeing series as well. So Charles, so happy to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here.
Oh, thank you, Linda, and thanks for everybody on the call and the meeting. I'm more than happy to do it, particularly this time of what we're going through. I mean, I think we've talked about it a little bit before, noted that never, ever have we gone through something all together, all at once in our society. And yeah, anything we could do to be helpful, I'm more than happy to be part of.
Thank you so much for that, Charles. So what we did was we actually asked you, our audience, to submit some questions, and we are going to get to those today as well, more towards the end of the presentation. Charles also has a presentation that he wants to share with us today. So we do have a full agenda. We may go a bit over the half an hour. So if you have to drop off the call, we totally understand. We will be recording this and sending out the recording, so you can also watch the rest of it at a later date if you don't have the time today. So with that, Charles, you wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about a subject that you are calling red brain, green brain. So if you want to go into that, we would love to hear more.
Sure. I'll start off with a couple minutes there and just kind of highlighting a few items that I have found over the years have been really helpful to people to understand kind of what's happening with them. This is me, all things equal, and this is me on stress. This is my brain on stress. So what I've certainly found, and I guess maybe one way to put it, is that over time, when we understand more what's happening with us, we have a greater capacity to manage it. So if we take a scientific lens to what we're all in our own way going through, is to understand this notion of what is commonly known as red brain, green brain. A red brain is the way the world looks red when we are under stress. That's the anxious brain. And if we take an evolutionary lens, that's like a really helpful thing to us. If we look back ancestry, years and years, hundreds of thousands of years ago, the brain initially involved not so much for cognition and helping us think. Its initial function was for safety, keeping us safe. So as a result, scanning the environment for what could go wrong. And then it would deal with it, and then we would have the green brain emerge, where the world looks green. That's the calm part of the brain, where we have this element of the experience, okay, I am now in recovery mode. I am now able to send the signal to the rest of my body that I can recover. I can repair anything that happened to me physically. So we always have this bidirectional communication between what's happening in our mind and what's happening in our body, and that repairing process is then underway. And over time, so we have this experience where we have the stress, then we have the recovery. We have the stress, we have the recovery. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that even more. You know, what is actually happening and why that develops and why it's so important. So we see constantly looking for danger, interpreting risk and threat, react mode that depletes our ability to self-express and heal. And in green mode, we are responsive, we're in a resting state, we feel safe, satisfied, and connected. And those three things, the safe, satisfied, and connected, are our way of managing ourselves. It's the core aspect of what our body is always trying to do. Be safe, be happy or satisfied or find meaning, and love, be connected, be in touch with other people. And right now, that is what is most thrown off, because safety always wins out over those other two as a matter of survival. And what's happened now, researchers call it that we are in this state of no longer red brain and then recovery from green brain. We're in this constant mode of either red brain or at the very best, this pink state where we maybe not one and the other, but if anything, we're more perpetuated in red and we don't have a sense of green. And that's why people day after day come in saying, I am not myself. Because when we're in the red brain and then recover to green, that is physiologically the biology of our best selves. We were meant to have a stress and then recover. But what we didn't expect is that we would have a perpetuated stress, and this system that the red brain, green brain is, under so much adversity that the stress is perpetuated, and as a result, we don't have a chance to recover. And one other thing I want to say on this, and then we'll go to the next slide, is what happens is as we experience stress and we deal with it, the brain is doing one, and our body is doing one of three things: improving or increasing our homeostatic capacity or our balance, maintaining it, which is not a bad thing either if we can do that, or it's being lowered, which means events, situations in our lives which typically wouldn't have led to an extreme or even a noticeable emotional reaction, now it does. And people are thinking about us, can't believe he was that upset about that, can't believe he said that about that, or she responded that way. So what we most typically see when we're emotionally dysregulated is our emotional responses to situations or events is disproportionate to the stimulus. And we even can't believe, and I get it all the time, I can't believe I said this to my daughter, can't believe I said this to my son, can't believe I looked at my coworker that way, that we become not the best version of ourselves. And if every day in some form or fashion is somewhat of a goal to be the best us, this is the perfect storm to not be that. And that, more than anything, when it comes to stress, is what people coming in are dealing with. And they don't even like what they're doing, let alone how the experience is around them. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about even more why that is, and then we'll maybe get to some questions. But if we look at this slide, what we were meant to do is stress, then recover, stress, then recover, stress, then recover, and so on and so on and so on. But what has happened over time, if we go to the next one, without recovery, all we have is stress. And when we haven't, and this is unfortunately, one of the last things I want to say about it, the difficulty is this: all things autopilot and left to chance, this is what we get. Without being purposeful, deliberate, and intentional, this is what we wind up with. We have to be, because, as I said before, safety overrides the other primary goals and urges that we have in life, to the extent that the brain and the mind would rather worry 1,000 times over for nothing. What's there? Oh, good, nothing. Do I have to worry? Oh, good, nothing. What's going to happen? Oh, good, nothing. We'd rather worry 1,000 times for nothing to be safe rather than not worry and have that one thing come and hurt us and be a threat to our survival. So as a result, we are hardwired to be more this: stress and stress and more stress, worry and worry and more worry, than we are to deal with it effectively all things equal. We are, but where we are now, this is not all things equal. This is something we've never seen before, and why we have to be as diligent, focused, intentional and purposeful to manage the stressors that we're experiencing and intentionally aiding ourselves with recovery, because that is our way of increasing the homeostatic capacity rather than having it limited. So I'll pause there and see first, Linda, if you have any comments or questions on what I just laid out, and if there's any questions from those on the call.
So I think it's really valuable, Charles, to kind of unpack that just a little bit, and the idea that we truly are wired to worry. So I think sometimes people are really getting down on themselves right now that they're not able to talk themselves out of this more readily. And so to me, it's very reassuring to hear, well, this is how our brains are wired, because they're wired to see the danger. So I'm really glad that you said that.
Let me even jump on that and underscore that what you raised is so important. And I think that's one of the things people are surprised about themselves, that the typical go-to strategies have not been effective. Why are they not working now when they did before? And feeling that there's something inherently wrong with them, rather than seeing this as a natural, almost neuroscientifically proven process. And once they have the understanding that, and the appreciation, one, I'm not alone, and secondly, that it isn't something wrong with me, this is kind of how I'm hardwired, there's almost an appreciation or relief that that is the experience. So it really helps put in perspective, and then we can take from there added measures to whatever their baseline is of what's been working and why not, and fortify it with additional ways to help manage what it is that they're experiencing. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more of that. What we actually see is to be able to, even if we look at it as growing green brain, growing that, intentionally making sure we are adding recovery to our lives, we become so hyper-focused on what can go wrong, what might go wrong, and even the belief that it will, we actually have to take time to bring attention to the positive things, the things that are working in our life, because they go away if we don't intentionally go there. I've mentioned it before on a previous talk and meeting, the idea of breath. There is nothing more that we can do that is immediately helpful to us than to be able to bring to our physiology the ability to manage ourselves through breath, managing our physiological and emotional state. So really, these tips are, if you look at it under an umbrella area, is basically saying, how can I be more self-aware physiologically and psychologically, and breath focus is the best way to be that. Sometimes even reflecting on something that helps us feel positive, helps us feel good. My 80-year-old mother, and I'm saying 80 years old because she turned that yesterday, her thing has been to deal with this, look back on some of the most positive memories that she has had. So each day finding something that she could reflect on that has been positive in her life. And many people who've come into the office over the last 3 months have been able to do similarly, looking at those sorts of things. The other things that I call under the behavioral realm, small things that work for you, whatever they may be, whether it's a walk, music, those sorts of things. But one that isn't on here, and I'm going to actually do this in the way of a kind of a mini challenge to everybody joining the meeting, is a guy named James Prochaska, one of the great researchers that we know. He has said that in the greatest stress, and his research has brought this to light, in the greatest stress, pronounced and prolonged stress, of all the things that we do and the experiences we have, one thing more than anything else is helpful to us. Because at the times of most pronounced or prolonged stress, we tend to go down one of two avenues. One, which is a maladaptive, things that maybe are immediately helpful, we call them dopamine connected, that are in the moment helpful, but over time not adaptive. Or another road that is adaptive, helpful, productive, beneficial, and positive things for us. And in that road, that positive adaptive one, there is one thing that he talks about that the research has borne out that is most helpful to us than anything else. And it's one small four-letter word. So if you could think to yourself, what would that be? Your only clue is it starts with a T. It's talk. When we take the time to talk, it brings about those other two core areas that we need that are core to us and our well-being, and that is connection, and that is satisfaction, life satisfaction. Those sorts of things are absolutely inherent, and they build trust, they build love, they build connection, and when we are doing those sorts of things, our life is getting better. So I want to say one other thing, unless, Linda, you have any questions on that. There's one other study I want to highlight that really helps us orient ourselves to how impactful what we're thinking is. But anything on there before I move on?
No, I loved all of that, and I think that there's something to be said for whatever we focus on is going to grow. So when you talk about the tips for growing your green brain, you have to focus on these things in order to make that happen. I saw a cool graphic just the other day where they showed different flower pots. And if you water the flower pot that says worry, that's what's going to expand. But if you water the flower pot that says joy and gratitude and thankfulness and anything else that motivates you, that's what's going to expand. So I think it's very important to point out that people need to be intentional. They do need to kind of set an agenda to work on this so that it does become more of a practice over time that turns into a behavior.
Well, and I love where you're going, and I want to double click on that just for a second. One is, even the last part you're saying, there's no hack to any of this. Everything we're saying, like, hey, grow more green brain. Yeah, that's great. There's no hacks to this. All of this is really hard work. I mean, we got to do the hard work to get there. After all, when you really look at it, we're cheating biology. That's not an easy thing to do. When we're overcoming our natural neurology and science and biology, it's hard work. And what you're saying is there's another story or metaphor to go along with it, and it's the wolf, the angry or the hungry wolf or the good wolf, and which one wins? The one we feed the most. And that is all an internal dialogue, which in its own way, I think even leads to this next concept that I'm going to highlight by way of one of my favorite studies. It's called the milkshake experiment, as if anybody on the call is familiar with it. This was something done at Harvard to demonstrate or to at least study a hypothesis. So I'll just take a minute or two to do this, and then maybe we could go into questions. But the hypothesis is this. If people drink, so they had people drinking 2 milkshakes, Sensa shake and sheer indulgence, sheer decadence you can afford. The Sensa shake was a shake that was really like only about 130 calories, no extra sugar, no added fat, a very sensible shake. And by the way, this is my kind of study because if shakes were health food, I'd be the healthiest guy on the planet. I like them so much I could only limit myself to 1 a year. That's Memorial Weekend as a start to summer. And these people not only got to drink milkshakes for the study, they were paid $75 to drink the milkshake. So they drank one day Sensa shake, 130 calories. The other sheer decadence was like 630 calories, loaded with fat, loaded with sugar, all the things that you maybe don't want all that much of if you're eating healthy. So in the study, they were, and part of why they got so much money, their blood was drawn. And what they were doing was drawing the blood because they were measuring ghrelin, which is a part of our body which tells our brain you're good to go. If we have a lot of ghrelin and it's at its highest level, that's telling our brain that we have to take it easy, manage ourselves, don't metabolize because we don't have enough fat, we don't have enough sugar, our metabolism slows down. So they were measuring ghrelin. When people drank the Sensa shake, their ghrelin level barely moved. It stayed right up there, keeping metabolism slow, so forth. They drank the sheer decadence, their ghrelin level dropped dramatically compared to the Sensa shake. And this is telling your body, you've got fat, you've got all this stuff, you're good to go, rev up, metabolize, you're all set, right? So, and if we just look at this from a purely science standpoint, this probably to everybody, if we think about it, we would think, yeah, that makes good sense. Not enough nutrients, our metabolism slow, we got everything, metabolism can rev up, ghrelin goes down. But here's the interesting thing and where the twist comes in. There was no such thing as either shake. Everybody drank the exact same shake, but given what they thought or they thought they knew about the shake, their physiology changed fairly dramatically. And the question becomes, why? Why did that happen? And if you're on the call and you're thinking, I know why, it's probably because you're thinking what's in your head matters. What's going on in your mind matters. What your mindset is matters. What you are telling yourself about the experience you're having, which if we take it to stress, it isn't just the stress you're having, but how you're coding that stress that impacts the system. And several of the questions that had come in were relative to that. Like, okay, this is stress, this is anxiousness, what do I do with it? Now, it doesn't mean we say, let's just have all the stress in the world because as long as we code it right, we'll be okay. The way we look at it will be okay. I'm definitely not saying that. None of us are wanting more stress. Most of us are on the call because we probably have enough. But what we want to be able to do with what we do have, manage that as effectively as possible. So with that, I'll pause and see if we want to hit a couple of questions before we go into a kind of closing and wrap up before you bring us all to a close, Linda.
Sounds good, Charles. Thank you for sharing that. That is absolutely fascinating. What a great study to just show us the power that our minds truly have. What we tell ourselves is what we will end up believing. So I think that is just pivotal for all of us to be coping during this time. So I did have some people submit some questions ahead of time, and then feel free to, if you do have a question for Charles, you can go ahead and chat that in. You can either send that to myself, Linda Golik, or you can send it to everybody if you don't mind everybody seeing it. But here's what we got ahead of time, Charles. So the first question was, is it possible for office workers to get a form of PTSD? I work in an office setting, and I'm currently at home, but during the pandemic, urgent work requests have accelerated to keep up with the COVID-19 demands. I find myself feeling anxious, especially at the beginning of the week. Is this normal? And what tools do you suggest to help?
One, almost everything we talked about today in the way of tips can be helpful with that. What I would say in addition to that, if you really do feel you have some form of that, and it doesn't have to necessarily even be PTSD to create a need to talk to somebody, but if there really is that extent to which I don't even feel that I can go to work, don't think I can be with the people that I work with, It's not like we can't get it or there aren't issues or symptoms or difficulties at work that can do that. We know workplace harassments, for example, are things that have created PTSD. So it's not that it's totally out of the question for an office employee to somehow experience that. But I would say to get an assessment, maybe talk with someone, but even think for yourself, am I on the mend? Am I improving as I try these things, or are my strategies not working? And would it be helpful for me to talk to someone and maybe possibly get an assessment, especially if I'm having symptoms that I don't feel like I'm managing and what I am trying to do doesn't seem to be fruitful? That might be time to get an assessment and see if there is something similar, akin to, or possibly even a PTSD experience.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charles. I think it's really important to note, don't ever be afraid to reach out for assistance.
Exactly.
That's why we're doing these sessions, because we want people to reach out. We want you to know that there are professionals that you can talk to, and don't be afraid to do so. There were a couple questions, Charles, surrounding human touch. So people being concerned about human touch being missing, especially for those folks that are elderly and in nursing homes and those types of things. Also, a human touch question that came up about really walking alongside someone who's grieving, somebody who's lost somebody near and dear during this time frame. So can you speak to any recommendations on that, Charles, how people can learn to manage that with the challenges we have going on with the COVID-19?
I can try, but this is a really, really tough one, and I'll tell you why. But what you can try is I don't think in our lifetime, at least the foreseeable future, we can replace human touch. And one question, I forget how it was worded, but someone worded it so wonderfully that, or even stated, I don't think anything really can replace human touch. And we may be right. I mean, people that I talk to have told me that is what they are missing most in this experience, missing hugs from grandchildren, grandparents, everything in between. And that is part of that connection and love that I was referring to earlier. The one thing that I can say that can be helpful, though, and people referenced it in some of the questions that were posed, I think the idea that what we have, and even the way you worded it, the idea that we have this part of us called mirror neurons, which always wants to connect with others. The ability to be able to, which is why, so here's an example. Watching a TV show or a movie that even though we know is fiction, it hasn't happened, we're watching it on our TV or at the movies, we can cry. I mean, almost everybody on the call has cried at a movie at some time that maybe didn't even happen and was totally fictional and actors, but we connect. So the bottom line is our minds, everything about us is profoundly social. And anything that we can still do to create that social connection until we can be more physical with each other is going to be helpful to us as we navigate through this difficult time. And I just hope something that when we do come to the other end of this, that makes when we do get to have those touches, those physical connections, even more loving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it is a time where people are getting creative with that. I know that I myself, I've received some beautiful like handwritten cards. People have called that haven't called in a long time. I mean, there are those positives happening where people are trying to connect. So I definitely would encourage people to continue to do that. Another question that we received is, what do I do if I'm required to go back to the office and I don't know if I can handle it? I'm scared with the virus still out there. I feel like I'm productive at home. Suggestions on how to talk myself into being okay to go to the workplace again.
And to me, that's an unbelievable, great, awesome question. And again, not an easy answer, but a few things that I'd really ask this person or anybody else, because I know a lot of people going through that. People got really comfortable working from home. There's some people it's been terrible, can't wait to get back, structure and so forth, but other people, especially out of fear, and a number of other reasons, it's been difficult. So I call it micro-resilience. And I'll give an example as the micro-resilience, people running a marathon is, can you make it, if you get 6 miles out, can you run another, or 20 miles out, can you do the next 6? Maybe not, but I can make it another step, or I can make it to the end of the block. I can make it to the next water station. If we can practice the idea of micro-resilience, just take it in steps, break it down. Maybe I don't think I can go back a full day, but maybe I can go this far. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do that. And maybe make arrangements with your supervisor of, this is what, as much as I can do, this is how I could break this down. But again, mentally looking at it, all of this would be hard, but let me look at it from a vantage point of what do I think I can do? How can I tap into that? And what I typically find, but more not me, people finding it for themselves. And if I had a nickel for the number of times I've heard this phrase in the last several weeks and months, I'd be amazed at the pileup, but you're stronger than you think. I'm stronger than I think. The people who have used that phrase to have done things that they didn't think they could do or were fearful of is tapping into that and dealing with it from that vantage point, taking it from a threat to a challenge, something I talked about last time. When we approach it that way, again, it may not be perfect right out of the gate, but this is looking at progress rather than perfection right out of the gate. And if we have that mindset, we're going to be stronger as we deal with that than we would be otherwise. So good luck to anybody dealing with that challenge. And again, I'm using that word advisedly, seeing it as that we have a better chance at managing it.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying there, Charles. It really is about just taking that next step, whatever that happens to be for you. So doing something small to move you in the right direction. Okay, we also had a question submitted about trust. So the question is, what about the trust factor? With false news or trying to determine what is true or not, it's hard to function without trust, always being on alert. How do you develop this in the world that we live in now?
Yeah, and I thought that was remarkably profound. Just hearing that from you, this whole idea, I think personally, I'm going to give you my personal theory first and then where we go with this. But one is trust matters as much or more than anything else. Our relationships and us getting through this is going to be based on trust. We're all that we have. And if we can't trust each other, this is going to be more difficult to get through. So, and then when it comes to sources, I look at it as who do I trust, who has built that up? We only build trust in nickels, dimes, and quarters, but we withdraw it only in large bills. So who in our lives has built that up with us that we know are a positive source for us to get information and be able to take it at maybe, even if it's not 100%, with more benefit to us than not. And when it comes to like the media, I certainly don't see myself as someone that can say who to trust and who not to, but to look at it from a vantage point of what for me feels that this person is building trust for me or these people or this group. So I can look at those nickels, dimes, and quarters and say, okay, this is helping me. But more often than not, that comes from solidifying relationships with other people and being able to say, this person has not, because I look at it this way, and I've always learned this, is that our words could lie, but our behaviors never do. our behaviors always tell the truth. So when we are focused on people's behaviors, friends, family, whomever, and it doesn't even mean that it's not truthful, but behaviors will always reveal who we really are. So when we're looking at building trust, we're not only looking at what someone might say, but what they might do to back it up. And in relationships, that is how we are consistently building trust. It's not easy, and sometimes I even say it's the 95%, but in the back of our mind, we still wonder. And what I found over time, it's only the people closest to that we have that full 100, that we trust them unconditionally. And it's a process through life that we're experiencing that.
I know you think it's really important too, Charles. Yes, there's things out there that maybe we're not trusting right now, and that's why it's important to direct our attention, again, to who can we trust? Where are the relationships where we know things are solid? We can turn to those people. We know they're going to be there for us, and we can be grateful for those relationships.
That's so incredibly true in our experiences. And when you think about those greatest quality relationships, it's because we've been through things together, and that has built even more trust. So we are to have perspective on anything, especially trust. Trust comes from perspective, and perspective comes from experiences. Well, it's a function of experience. What our experiences are lead to our perspective, and that tells us who is trustworthy to us and who isn't. And the one other thing I would say with that is your own intuition, your gut. People tell me all the time, my gut has told me more than anything else. And that's the connection that we have. So anybody who can experience that on the call can feel it for themselves. I've known when I can trust this person. I not only felt it, but then my experience with them was able to bear that out.
Definitely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I don't see any other questions. So as we wrap up here, if you have additional questions, you can certainly reach out to us. You can reach myself. You can look for our Bellin Lifesaver Wellbeing Series, and an email is up on the screen there, wellnessconsultant@bellin.org. If you have additional questions, send those our way, and we'll get those to Charles, and we'll get back to you. And perhaps we'll use it in our next segment. But Charles, what are your final thoughts today? What do you want to leave people with today? What do you think is most important for them to remember as we continue to move forward and just kind of adjust to all the changes that we've seen really just in the last few months?
I think as much as anything else that what we're thinking and how we're experiencing matters as much as what is actually happening. And there's no greater superpower that we have than our mind. And when we think about that and use that effectively, that superpower for us rather than against us, we're moving in the right direction. When you change your mind, you change your life. When you change your life, you change your world. If we're always changing that for the positive, then that's the best that we could hope for, because that is absolutely awesome. So with that, I want to thank everybody on the call. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, and hope all of us, everybody out there, continues to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Charles, for taking that time today and giving us, as always, such amazingly solid advice to help us manage during these times. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great rest of the day. And